Thank you very much for being so patient. We had a vote that we didn't expect, but we're back. Let me ask the president of the Ford Foundation. First of all, I want to thank you for all your great work, and thank each of you for all your great work. But I remember the work of the foundation, and I think at the table you may be the largest, right? Would you agree that you want? Would you agree that you like to?
The largest, second largest foundation, I think. Yes, Gates being larger.
No, but you're the largest in this room.
Yes.
Right.
And a small person in the largest foundation.
But when the Ford Foundation, like some of the other, when you speak, when you make a decision, you think others in the foundation community tend to listen? So, well, the Ford Foundation made this decision. The Ford Foundation did 1, 2, 3. The Ford Foundation did ABC. You think you help others to come along? Or sometime it may be one of the smaller foundations that get out and do something in a sort of a pilot program or demonstrate something that encourage others to come along?
We work very often with other donors. Sometimes they bring very good ideas to us. The example I gave of creating 50,000 new homeowners among low-income, low-credit score families, that was brought to us by a North Carolina organization, the Center for Community Self-Help, that had been supported by North Carolina donors. They came to us saying, you're a national donor, can we now take this thing that worked in one state nationally? So sometimes it works that way. Other times we create a partnership in which we invite others in. We created something called the Dream Fund, which was to work on the issue of affirmative action and how to get more equity in education and employment. And we went out and put a challenge of $10 million on the table and invited others in, and more people came as a result of that. So I think it works both ways.
I know you have a long history of being supported of that effort. You mentioned the Fellows Program. And in another period in our history, I would meet Ford Fellows, especially in the South. And people took so much pride in being a Ford Fellow. And they got out and did good work. Have other foundations, other charitable organizations picked up on the idea of recruiting a particular person, a group of individuals with certain skills, and to go into a community or go to a college or university or to work with a community organization and do good work?
Yes, I think providing fellowships is one of the most common and popular kinds of philanthropy for people who are concerned with new leadership and helping people step up who haven't had so many opportunities. So you see many family foundations, we heard an example of one earlier, who give fellowships, and then there are other large foundations, Commonwealth, Carnegie, many others who make fellowship investments as well. It's a very important aspect of philanthropy.
I understand that the Ford Foundation has studied ways to effect large-scale social change to reduce poverty and injustice worldwide. Have you discovered anything? Have you learned anything that you care to share with us?
I think the question of what impact comes from is very important. I think there are 5 or 6 components of it. One is to have a specific goal, not just to set out to do good in a vague way, but have a very specific goal of some way you're going to help a group of people. Second is to have a strategy to achieve that result that is informed by beneficiaries as well as the foundation and experts. Third is to make sure you have enough money. You got to mobilize resources of people and money, and you have to then create some kind of an information system and ways of having a dialogue with the people in the program to see if it's working. Nothing works perfectly. You want to be able to change things. And then finally, you have to invest for the long term. These are not easy problems to overcome. If you want to do something on scale, it takes a while to build to scale. And ultimately, you want to be able to share your lessons with other grant makers. I think you have before you something called GrantCraft that we have supported now for a number of years. We've tried to distill the lessons of good grant making through this and share it very widely. It's available free on the net. And one of the new guides that's online is called Grant Making with a Racial Equity Lens, just to give you an example of maybe 20 or 30 such things that we have to share with other grant makers.
So in this day and age of technology, in another period, we didn't have this sort of ready-made tools and instrument where people can get information to draft a proposal, to submit a proposal to a foundation, to a possible funding source. Is that something that can be done to make information more accessible to people without the technology? How do you get information out? Say into some community organization, some group in rural Mississippi or in rural Alabama or South Georgia or in New Mexico or in Minnesota. You need something, maybe we can help.
There are now across the country a growing number of regional associations of grant makers that get down to the local level, let people know what good proposals are, where they can direct them. That's a very important resource. And then organizations like the Council on Foundations, very important. There are also associations of grant makers concerned with health, concerned with rural development. They all help people figure out where to direct their proposals. So I think we can build this to a much more robust and broad system than it is, but we have the components of that to build now, I think.
Other members of the panel would have anything you'd like to add? Is there something that members of the Ways and Means Committee that we should be considered doing to make grant making or finding a way to rewrite the tax code to make it easy and simple for you to give money away? You're in the money giving, right? Or resource giving.
I would like to encourage members of Congress to support H.R. 1419, the Good IRA Rollover Act. I believe that it is an excellent strategy to further democratize philanthropy. It allows folks who have IRAs, and if you work, you get an IRA. It allows everyday people who I consider myself and many of us do to be able to use our IRAs to help charitable organizations and to support charitable goods and good in the community. And so we really encourage that you sign up and support that. The other, I think, is to really begin to get to know and understand this world of philanthropy and the sector. I'd actually like to thank Representative Jones for her promotion of the Congressional Philanthropy Caucus, because you learn from relationships and from understanding each other's worlds and from being together and learning what terms mean and the mores and the values that each other have. And I think that's a good starting point to figure out how we can better work together, you know, to improve the communities that we all care about. And so those are two very distinct but important ways that I think we can begin this journey.
Let me, my colleague is here, and I know that she wanted to ask some questions. But at one time, I'm just sort of curious. At one time in our recent history, there was this sort of mindset that the foundation community didn't want to be too visible, didn't want to get in the way. You wanted to sort of stay under the curve, and you were afraid that somebody would come down on you, maybe the IRS. You don't have
Maybe.
you don't have that fear anymore, do you? Back in the '60s, back in I guess the big tax reform act that we had in '69, and there was this fear that if you got in the way, you got out of line. And so some members of the foundation community became somewhat cautious. Mm-hmm. Have you thrown, for the most part, caution to the wind, and you just go out and just try to do the best with the resources you have? I'd just like to hear the response from
Well, I think the growth of the number of foundations is an example of the robustness of the field, really. We've doubled the number of foundations in the last 20 years or so, and I think you find a lot more confidence now among the institutions in pursuing their varied visions. And I think the most important thing is to make sure that the variety of views, the diversity of American philanthropy be protected. That's what really makes philanthropy so healthy. It's not just directed towards one field. It's not just directed towards one kind of subject. It's a very diverse field. I do think that hearings like this one are very important, and I hope you'll continue to do this and do it in other parts of the country, because I think it helps focus the field on disadvantage, on people who are marginalized, and where the money is going, and whether there could be some shifting in emphasis. Hearings like this are very important in that way.
Well, thank you very much.
Mr. Chair, if I could come back to your first question, I really think if you could return to the non-itemizer deduction and allow all people who are contributing to charity to get a deduction, it would go a long way towards bringing more people into the field and much more diversity into the support of charities, which in turn will change the way charities see themselves and how they're viewed by the people in their own communities. I know it's an expensive issue, and you've had a number of conversations about it here in this body and in the full committee, but I think it's an important thing that as a country we need to look seriously at.
Well, thank you very much. The gentlelady from Ohio is now recognized.
Thank you.
Bob Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for your leadership on this subcommittee. I requested that I have an opportunity to serve on oversight with you because of all your leadership over the years. I just want to thank you for that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I thank Ms. Grady for giving recognition about the Philanthropic Caucus, and we hope to, over time, to have an opportunity to sit with you or your designee to really have a chance to have some discussion about what philanthropy means and how the Congress and your organizations can work towards a similar ends. I was worried for a moment there that we were getting lost in going after charities and nonprofits and not really being focused on that which we ought to be focused on. For a moment, I represent the city of Cleveland. Most of you know that, where we have some wonderful, wonderful foundations like Gund and Cleveland Foundation and some other smaller foundations operating. I'm always concerned that as we talk about diversity in philanthropy, that there's this divide. It's almost like the internet divide, you know, where we talk about digital divide is what the word I want. And somehow we have to begin to help poor and working poor folks understand philanthropy outside of the tithing in a church, so that they feel a part of it. I've been happy to be part of Cleveland Saves in Cleveland, where we've begun to try and help people save, and I think Ford gave us a bunch of money for that back in the day, and we're really thankful for it, and it's going very, very well. But all of us need to engage in that, because otherwise it ends up being the rich who can give to nonprofits and philanthropy, and those on the other end who don't, and it becomes a habit. That once you get engaged in the habit, it's something that you do over and over again. And I would, without getting an answer from anybody at the moment, I would like to encourage all of you to think about that in those terms and think about whether or not part of the dollars that you expend in choosing, you know, some money is spent in building community and helping people understand schools, but maybe we need to put it into how do we build community through, and if it's not giving of money, it's giving of time, and that we reward the giving of the time as much as we reward the giving of money. And time is such a precious item. I was watching some show the other day, and it was talking about this woman who had 3 kids, and that she got up in the morning, took her kids, dressed them, took them to the sitter or school, and then she went to work, and then she got back on the bus and went back home and picked them up, and all that things that we are involved in. Let me secondly move particularly to the Red Cross and Mr. Brown. I was in, and I know you get this all the time, but I was in Louisiana, and the thing that struck me most, and the thing that I heard from more of my constituents of color who were educated and experienced was, well, you haven't been trained in American Red Cross training, so we can't allow you to help out the Red Cross when people were in dire need. I'm not trying to be combative at all, but I sure hope that you have had an opportunity based on that experience, because when I went to visit, I found that everybody in receipt of the service was of color, and everybody given the service was of the majority. And that creates a real tension that I did not care for, and I could leave. Some of the other people were stuck there. So I would be interested in knowing, what have you done since that experience to diversify the standby folks who are ready to make a move when another catastrophe occurs?
Well, it really taught us a couple lessons. The criticism is well taken. The first thing we can do is that try to engage people in partnerships before storms arrive. And by that, I mean, the example we had this past weekend, we have 4,000 to 5,000 Vietnamese fishermen who are on the southeast Louisiana coast. When Katrina hit, we did not have a relationship with them. The Red Cross simply did not have a way of speaking their language, understanding their, what they need, understanding their culture. We now have a partnership with Boat People SOS. That is the group, a national group, that has a linkage to the fishermen. We have provided disaster training to Boat People SOS. We provide provisions, supplies, that sort of thing. They actually were going to run a shelter for us this past weekend. Fortunately, the tropical depression didn't materialize in the New Orleans area. They were actually going to run the shelter for us to make sure that these fishermen would be cared for in the event of a disaster. It's that sort of thing that we need to do all over the country. There are many non-traditional groups that aren't in the disaster business, but we can train them and provide them with supplies and the type of thing you need in the event a storm happens, so we can do that ahead of time. That's one of the things we're doing right now.
Real happy to hear that, and that's a great thing going on, but there are people who speak the same language, live on the same corner, go in the same store and don't communicate. So I hope that you figure out how you do it to people who speak the same language as well. I know you've been here quite a while, so I'm anxious to volunteer if I have any time left from anybody who wants to ask me a question or volunteer to help me or say I don't like what you're saying or whatever it is you want to say. If anybody is looking, or if you're not, I want to encourage all of you to make sure someone from your organization is involved with our caucus. I expect that we're going to have an opportunity to do great things. I'm an optimist and look forward to having an opportunity to work with you and others. My colleague Robin Hayes is my co-chair from South Carolina, and so we got a Republican, a Democrat, a male and a female, a black and a white. You know, we're all diverse, and so we're trying to hook it up. And I thank the chairman for the opportunity to say hello if nobody has anything they want to say. Please, Ms. Grady.
I'd just like to share, thank you for your comments, and I'd like to share just some learnings that we had in Atlanta when we completed a 2-year study and community conversation around African American philanthropy. And what we found was exactly as you expressed. There was a level of discomfort with many African Americans who had wealth on all economic spectrums with considering themselves as philanthropists. That term was one that they could not own. They were volunteering, they were giving money, they were giving time, but they were not comfortable with the notion of being a philanthropist, because you got to be rich to be a philanthropist. So I think that you're absolutely right, and thank you for your comments, that it really is a community conversation and transformation around what is philanthropy, the givers, the volunteers, the people who secure the funds, the recipients, everyone, and together. I think it's the sector. Another thing we learned from the study was that many nonprofits would have volunteers, particularly African Americans, because that was the focus, who were volunteering regularly without fail, and they never asked them for money. You know, they never thought of them as being potential donors, but just in volunteers. So I think as a sector, we have to think about that. And then we found that individually, there is a level of savvy that that was not often existing around how to manage your money in a healthy financial way. And so many folks talked about helping others, helping their neighbors, helping their family, putting out lots of money in different ways in informal philanthropy, but not going through agencies where they could get a tax write-off and, you know, and do a planned gift and so forth. So there's this individual opportunity as well. But I really appreciate your comments, because I think we've got to break down that word and really talk about what it means, and that's just doing good with and for other people.
Did you ever have a chance to meet a gentleman by the name of Stephen Rowan that used to be with the Cleveland Foundation?
Yes, yes.
He is my pastor at Bethany Baptist Church, and we are blessed to have a pastor who's a lawyer. He's a doctor of divinity, has had years of experience in foundation work, and so we're trying to move along right. But I thought maybe you might have had a chance to meet him. The last thing, I promise this is the last thing, Mr. Chairman. I'm working with a group of 8th grade girls right now. I just decided to adopt them one day. I went to the school. I think that is another location. Even though we focus in on education, in the process of education, we might try and see whether or not that's a place where we might start talking about philanthropy, just like we might do financial schools or financial, teaching children finance. We might want to teach them that in the process of what they learn and make it part and parcel of the educational process. Just another idea from a lowly public servant. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Oh, hold on one second. Ms. Fink, yes.
Yes, thank you. First of all, Congresswoman Tubbs Jones, I would like to thank you again for co-chairing the House Philanthropic Caucus. And I also want to thank you for being a sponsor of the Savings for Working Families Act. We have been working with individual development account programs in the state of Minnesota. United Way has 2 of them going, and they are phenomenally successful. Low-income people want to be able to create some assets. They want to save, and we have not had any problem getting people to subscribe to those savings. And we have some great stories. We've also, part of one of our projects was working with high school students at a public high school, and that's been phenomenally successful too. So again, thank you for your support of that.
Ms. Beresford.
I would just mention a very interesting program about youthful philanthropy, picking up on your point. We fund something in New York called Common Sense that's now spreading around the country. And what it does is kids from schools all through the New York school system go out and collect all the pennies that people keep on their bureaus in a little box or in a, a pile somewhere. And last year they collected $650,000 worth of pennies. Each school was credited with how much it then collected, and then kids in the school sat together and figured out, well, how are they going to spend that money in their own community for people in need? And it's a very interesting thing about the moral engagement of kids, about activism in your community, as well as sort of the underutilized talents of kids and the underutilized resource of pennies. And I think it's going to spread around the country in a very interesting way.
Since my colleague is still writing over here, I have one last question, I promise. I hope that in the course of the work that you're doing, that all of your agencies are looking at your relationship with minority businesses to help grow your communities. We have laws that require government to do it. We have moral engagement that other people do. But if truly you're going to be the philanthropic organizations that represent the nation, it would be very, very important that you help increase the communities of color within your area. Because I always talk about, I can build houses in my district, I can improve the schools in my district, but if I don't have jobs in a business community or sample for my kids to see, then I've not done my job. And they need to have jobs, and they need to also see people like them who are running businesses in their community. So if you're doing anything, or if you are, if you're not, let me help you.
Before I recognize the gentleman from, let me just thank my colleague and the gentle lady from Ohio. also for organizing and co-chairing this wonderful caucus. And thank you for your great interest and for being here. Before I recognize my colleague and member from California, let me just try something on you here. And I don't want to preach to you, but our country is changing. It's a different country. It's becoming so diverse. I speak a great deal about we all live in one house, the same house. That it doesn't matter whether you're black or white or Hispanic or Asian American or Native American, or whether we rich or poor, gay or straight, we all live in the same house. Whether we're Protestant, Catholic, or Jewish, but something is happening in America. And I think the foundation community, the nonprofit sector, must be out there pushing and pulling and helping to build this greater sense of community, this greater sense of one house, that you have to lead the way. You have to find a way of what I call getting in the way. And there's one organization, and I don't want to single out any particular organization. I don't want to get in trouble here. But there's a group, and I just want to try something out on you. It's based in California. Whether you ever heard of this group. I was in Little Rock yesterday for the 25th anniversary of the Little Rock 9, and the representatives, something called Sojourn to the Past. It was started by an American high school history teacher. And since 1999, this young man been recruiting high school students and bringing them to the South in groups of 100. They're black, they're white, they're Asian American, they're Hispanic, they're Native American. They spend 10 days traveling through the South, studying, learning about what happened. These young people are going to be, I meet them now all over the country, attending colleges and universities all over America. They're going to be better citizens. And I know they're getting some resources, Mr. Becerra, from the California legislature and from private individuals and maybe some foundations out there, I don't know. But if the foundation communities and organizations in different parts of our country can get out there and help create another group of leaders to bring us together as one house, one people. Have you ever thought about something like that? Or maybe you're doing something like that. Anyone want to react? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Well, I think, first of all, your point about understanding history is very important, and finding, first of all, materials like the wonderful series Eyes on the Prize, and making sure that schools have that school systems use that in their teaching of American history. And then I agree with you entirely. Kids getting out and working together and having a common experience. We all live separately. We all occupy somewhat different worlds, and we overcome some of the sense of distance and perhaps distrust if we do something together. And so I think any kind of youth programs that bring people together, working in a common effort, youth service, that kind of thing, very, very valuable.
Thank you. That's great.
I'd like to recognize and cue in on the notion of leadership building, because I think that that's probably the most important thing that foundations, and particularly community foundations, which are tied to geographic regions, can do, is to support leadership development. We have, for the past 8 years, operated the Neighborhood Fund Leadership Institute, but it's grassroots leaders. It's folks who every day are taking our blood pressure and driving us in trains and don't have time to to fly up to Washington and talk and don't get leave from their job to do that, but live in a community and want to make a difference. And so on Saturdays, they get up and they come to this Leadership Institute, and the curriculum is in partnership with the University of Georgia, and they learn about community issues, economic development, how to communicate, diversity in their community, and so forth. And then they begin to connect their local issues to the larger social dynamics and economic dynamics of the region and then of the country, and it gets bigger and bigger. And you just find them opening up in a very different way and becoming much clearer and more deliberate about what they can do alone, and then what they can do with a larger group. And they bring in their young people and they bring them on. We've graduated 120 now from about 7 of our counties, and it just continues to be an amazing experience, and all around just that local leadership of everyday folks who can really make a difference.
Thank you. Now I recognize Mr. Vasari, my friend.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And to the panelists, thank you for graciously waiting for us to return. You know, we're in the process of engaging in a conversation or debate on the reauthorization of the state health insurance program for children. And many of us believe that it's shameful that at this day and age that we still have millions of American children who don't have access to health care and don't have health insurance. And we'll get there partway if this legislation that we have in the Congress gets signed by the President, who has threatened to veto it, but maybe we'll make some progress. But I think clearly there's a lot that we all still need to do with regard to serving the needs of all Americans. And as we think about that, and in this committee, for our purposes, since we have responsibility over the tax code, the more we talk about tax reform or hear about it, there is this desire to re-examine some of these tax expenditures that we have out there, many which cost a great deal of money, whether it's the deduction for health insurance that we allow employers, or whether it's the mortgage interest deduction, or of course the charitable deduction that's allowed for charitable contributions. And many are saying we have to refocus and find out if in fact these tax expenditures and the money that they cost the Treasury is worth the value in having those tax expenditures. So I'm glad you're here, because I think we're going to examine that question. And with regard to you today and this issue before us, I think we will want to take a look at whether or not we're serving the best purpose in having individuals deduct from their taxes that they would otherwise provide to the federal government monies that are going to charities and foundations so that we serve the general welfare of our people. And a lot of us want to find out if that last part is still correct, that we're serving the general welfare of our people. And I think, Dr. Wolpert, I think you mentioned in some of your work and testimony that most people give to charities which serve them. So your local church, the local service organization, you tend to give to that which is within your circle of familiarity, which obviously makes sense. But it also means that chances are, if you're a fairly wealthy American, chances are you give to causes that are within your reach and your circle. And if you're a poor American, chances are there's very little within your reach, and there's very little you can give to those who are within your reach, which would then ask the question, or pose the question, well then, do the wealthy who are getting this tax break from money they would have to pay to the federal treasury for purposes like S-chip, health care, education, war in Iraq, are we being best served by allowing people who can make contributions not provide tax dollars to the federal government to serve the general welfare? And if it's true that you give to those that are within your reach, and if it's true that, let me see, I have a statistic here that wealthy people give a smaller share of their contributions for the purpose of serving the needy than do other Americans, then it seems like maybe there's something going on here, especially when you look at family foundations that are formed by, in most cases, obviously, folks who have the wherewithal to start these foundations. Do you think it's time for us to examine who gives the money and in more detail where it goes?
Yes, I think as a long-range goal, that's very important to do. But to make some short-run progress in helping the affluent to be more charitable, there are a number of things that can be done. Because I think, the issue is the hungry children, the children who don't have a chance to go to college, and we want to help them before Congress is able to do something as complex as remove a deduction. And the studies have shown that voluntarism helps enormously. That is, if you can get the wealthy to use some of their time in voluntary activities, whether it's in a shelter or in a Big Brother program, it leads almost invariably to sizable financial contributions. It's important for the wealthy to find out that the people they're helping are people like themselves, who have similar values, who are not, quote, different.
Would you, and Dr. Boris, I'd like you to join in on this particular question, would it be worthwhile to examine our tax treatment of gifts and gifts based on where they are focused?
Well, we already know that they're focused and they're not redistributive. I mean, we already know that. We have good information on that.
So you could probably incent noble activity by providing a better return for your contribution if you direct, if you through the tax code say that you will treat charitable gifts more generously under the tax code if they are directed at the general welfare or direct general welfare of serving those who are in need.
It depends on the part of the country. That is, if you live in a state like Massachusetts or New York, where you have a relatively generous public sector, which keeps a relatively high safety net, then it seems quite all right morally for affluent people to give their money to support the arts and culture and museums, okay? In parts of the country where there is a relatively parsimonious public sector at the state level or community level, in that way it's kind of inexcusable that the wealthy do not, because their lobbying has been very helpful in keeping local taxes low. It's incumbent on them morally to be, quote, more charitable. And they are to some degree.
Dr. Boris, any comment?
Couple of thoughts. First of all, the tax rates have gone down. And if you're talking about tax incentives, there's a major disincentive, in a sense, for charitable giving. But if we think about where...
You're not encouraging us to increase the tax rates, are you?
Personally, I think you should. That's my values. Many people feel that, providing for basic needs really should come out of government because it can be equitably distributed across the country.
Right.
Not to rely on charities, which are here and there and everywhere. So that's one point. And also, at the top end of the income scale, there are individuals who are giving way beyond what they could ever deduct. And at the bottom end of the income scale, they can't deduct anything. So you're talking about a small slice in the middle that you would encourage, probably, not a small slice, but a middle class kind of slice that you would encourage. Now Arizona, the state of Arizona, has a tax credit, which it's targeted to only to charities which serve 50% or more of those who are low income. Now when we looked at what was the result of that, more money has flowed into those charities, but nobody certifies that they're 50% or more low income. And the money now is going to the larger organizations that are more visible, instead of to maybe smaller organizations that maybe still be doing good community work. Our data are just really lousy on this, who benefits.
And do you think it's possible to collect good data?
On who benefits? We could do better. But we don't have access to the records of where people's income tax goes. We have to do surveys. of both nonprofits and income and individuals and foundations to get better data. At my center, we could go, we started down this road, we're not quite there yet, but we know where the charities are all located. We also know from the 990, what proportion are contributions. Unfortunately, we can't disentangle right now foundations and individuals, but we could get down to the zip code if we had, the resources to do it and tell you where the money is going. But it's not the same as where individuals of wealth are giving their money or individuals of middle class are giving their, that's all survey and it's very expensive.
Mr. Chairman, I know my time has expired. If I may ask just one last question, and we can pose other questions in writing. And I really would love to follow up with some of you on this. But let me ask one last question. Administrative expenses. My understanding is that in many cases, foundations include their administrative expenses as part of the amount that they consider to have gone in grant or giving. And in some cases, my understanding is that some foundations have very high overhead. And so therefore, a large percentage of the grant is bottled up in administrative expenses, which really go to no purpose to help a particular community in need. Any comment on whether it's an issue, first of all, and secondly, if there's something that we should be doing with regard to the issue of administrative expenses by foundations?
That's an issue that I'm studying right now. And the reality is that the administrative expenses are really quite low across the foundation world. There are some examples of high administrative expenses. Some of the ones that we've looked into, what has happened is there are direct charitable programs that the foundations are doing with their own staff. And so we found one that had, I think, like 80% administrative expenses, and we have to find out who this is. And we found out that they have a staff of 100 researchers who are doing all kinds of research, and they give, a small amount of grants and a lot of, in-kind kind of work that they're doing. I wouldn't say that it is a huge problem in terms of, most of the foundations in the U.S. don't even have staff, so there are no charitable expenses at all. What the telling factor is, as soon as they hire a staff person that enables them to do the grant work, then the charitable expenses take a quantum leap. But still, in terms of other organizations, I don't think that we would say that there's a huge number out there who are gaming the system.
Appreciate that. I thank you all for your comments. I look forward to your further participation as we continue to study this issue. Mr. Chairman, I thank you very much for holding this hearing, because I do believe there will be a value in trying to get a better sense of the value of the charitable component in the tax code, and how we can make it an even better and more targeted approach to trying to help us address the general welfare of our communities in this country. So I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Well, thank you, gentlemen from California, for your line of questioning. I just want to sort of close this out. If the young lady from Cleveland, from Ohio, may not have another question.
Of course I have, but I'm not going to ask it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Before we adjourn, and you all been so wonderful, so patient, and maybe Ms. Grady, maybe one of you, any of you may want to respond. In our country, there have been, in recent years and recent days, there have been so much bashing of a certain segment of our society. And there's so in a city like Atlanta and some other cities and states, there's growing diverse population. And we hear the debate on the floor. We hear it on the floor, people bashing people, saying they're here and we're not going to provide services. They're not legal. I saw a T-shirt the other day, put out by the American Friends Service Committee, and I've been tempted to put it on and wear it on the floor, but they probably throw me off the floor, and said, no human being is illegal. No human being is illegal. There are people that are afraid, politicians, elected officials are afraid to do things, to do what I call the right thing, the moral thing. Is there something that foundations can do and said to the government, said to those in elected position, this is the right thing to do. Provide service, meet basic human needs. When it comes to health care, when it comes to education, somebody doing it someplace in America, so we're going to do it because it's the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. It's the fair and just thing to do.
I might respond again by speaking to the importance of really supporting civic voice. I mean, government has a voice, the corporate sector has a voice, but where is it that everyday folks are able to get together around issues that are important, around their community, around regional issues, around child welfare, around the environment, to be able to have a voice, come together, learn from each other, and then begin to mobilize to move an agenda forth. I believe that happens by providing folks with the tools and the skills and the knowledge and the access to each other and to experts to be able to do that. And so I think that foundations can support that by investing in leadership programs and school-based programs, teaching philanthropy at a young age, and really increasing that civic voice and capacity of communities so that they can speak for themselves and not be intimidated by a perceived lack of power or influence or knowledge.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I don't want to create the impression that we live in a Pollyanna or that I am one, but the 200 agencies that we fund in the Twin Cities are just filled with small organizations who are doing their charitable work because they believe in it. They believe it's the right thing to do. To use your words, it's the moral thing to do. The agency that Marcia talked about, Community Emergency Assistance Program, $2 million budget, 22 staff, in a community that has 10% people of color, and they're serving 60% people of color because they've come, and many of them are Somali, and they've come to our country for a different life, and supported by about 50, 60 different churches who really want to help people. And we see it every day. And part of the reason people like myself and Marcia stay in this field is because we see what those individuals are willing to do for the whole purpose of helping somebody other than themselves.
Yes, Madam President.
I think the point about moral voice is very important. I think we've all said it, and you've said it wonderfully. We need to have people who speak in more than sound bites, and I think we need to have dialogues between the nonprofit sector, the business community, and government about what really guides our country and makes it great. I think we need to hear from people about where they think their values came from, what their values mean for them, and what it animates them then to do, because that is inspiring. It creates protection for other people to step out and do something. And we don't have enough of that. We have much too much of the soundbite communication. And I think if we can figure out fora in which we sit together and talk about these things in more than just a moment on the news, we will begin to restore the kind of community that we're all Americans, we're in one house, that you're speaking of.
Well, thank you so much, and thank each of you for the words, your statement, your testimony. You made a wonderful contribution, how we can better serve the interests of our diverse communities. We appreciate your patience, and there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned. Thank you so much.